Yeah, I'm here to talk to you today about the habitat focus area, the one that's in the Choptank River. So the idea, the backstory on this quickly is many of you probably remember or knew Eric Schwab. Eric Schwab came to Noaa a couple years ago. He's now with the Baltimore Aquarium, but he came to Noaa a couple years ago as the head of fisheries. And when he came in, he was asking around to see what was new and what's next. And he had a conversation with Bob Diaz, who some of you might know at VIMS, a big hypoxia guy, big habitat guy. And Bob told him, you know what's next? Habitat. You're getting close to ending overfishing. You're starting to make strides there. The next real thing is habitat. So what are you going to do to address habitat? So Eric, I think, took that to heart and asked NIMS and Noaa to start looking more constructively at habitat conservation and see how we can build that into our business plan. As a result, this idea of habitat focus areas came about. I'll talk a little bit about where that came from in a minute. But we do have one here in the Chesapeake Bay. That's the Choptank. We are looking at the Choptank for several reasons, but in particular, we've got a lot of investment there already in oyster restoration. The people there have noticed that there are changing conditions, population is growing, there are sea level rise impacts and other things that might affect their livelihoods and what they want in terms of the future of this place. And we also recognize that there's a lot of opportunity to leverage other federal, state, local investments in this place. I'll get into that in a little more detail. So, from the Eric Schwab focus on habitat came what's called the Noaa Habitat Blueprint. It suggested 3 or 4 guiding principles. One is that Noaa needed to prioritize its resources in some places. We were all over the place. We want to get the biggest bang for our buck and show measurable results. The way to do that is to focus. We also wanted to improve decisions, but in an ecosystem context. Instead of just looking at one issue, we want to try to integrate more of these things to improve decision making. We wanted to create ways to better deliver our science to those decision makers, which will help with looking at things more of an ecosystem context. And then, of course, in those places where we're doing work, try to better foster and leverage the partnerships that already exist and build on those. So the Habitat Blueprint started developing habitat focus areas where we could actually implement those core principles I just discussed. There are actually 8 regions that Noaa identified across the country. There are 7 habitat focus areas, and they're growing by the day. I think we might be going on 9 now. But the one in the Chesapeake, as I mentioned, is the Choptank River. Why the Choptank River? There are a lot of opportunities here. One, as I mentioned, we have a lot of investment in oyster restoration, working with Maryland DNR and other partners. So we already had a vested interest in this place. There are a lot of opportunities. We know that it's striped bass habitat in that river system. We know that the people there are interested in engaging in developing some sort of more, envisioning a conservation plan for the Choptank, and sea level rise and other impacts are potentially affecting this place. Where is it? What does it look like? It actually encompasses 2 states and 5 counties. So the 2 states, Delaware and Maryland. It's the largest river on the Delmarva Peninsula, and it also includes several sub-tributaries: Harris Creek, Broad Creek, Avon River, the Choptank itself, and then Little Choptank here. It also includes several current oyster sanctuaries, so it was a place that we thought we could combine a lot of effort. It's predominantly agricultural, about 61% agricultural. Excuse me. There are a couple of major population centers. You've got Denton there at the north end. You've got Easton and then Cambridge in the south. Those areas themselves are changing demographically, so that creates opportunity and also challenges. But we want to recognize those. You got some forested area, and of course, again, like most areas in the Chesapeake, a lot of land mass to a little bit of water. That's important because we want to try to look at how we can help thwart how land use impacts might affect in-water resources as part of this project. Some of the challenges this place is facing: oyster populations across the bay, as you've heard, less than 1% of historic abundance. That's true in this river system. Oysters have been on the decline, but we are working to try to restore those. you've got sea level rise issues. The map here, and you can't see it from back there, but look at the red. The red areas are where we're looking at significant sea level rise. This is Blackwater Wildlife Refuge. This is along the Little Choptank. You can see several red areas along the Tread Avon Broad, and Tread Avon, Harris Creek, and Broad River, and up the Choptank. So sea level is an issue, and that could impact, as you've talked about today, wetlands and other things. Population is not only growing, but also changing. As I mentioned, demographics are changing in this place. Population is increasing. That also means that land use is changing, and potentially in a way that could impact both land and water resources. So, all that led us to think about what might be next for the Choptank. So we didn't see it as a sun setting on the Choptank, but rather a way that we can envision a new day. So what are we going to do and bring about that new day? These are the 4 areas for Noaa to focus on. We're going to work on restoring oyster reef habitat and recovering the oyster populations in this tributary. We're going to quantify the benefits of those oyster reefs. It's not just bringing back the populations, but those oyster reefs are habitat for other things like striped bass, crabs, fish, things that people like to catch and eat, that bring recreational opportunities as well. We're also going to improve the way we're delivering our science, in particular our habitat science. We've been doing habitat mapping to support the oyster reefs, but that has broader uses in terms of knowing where habitats are, what priority areas we might choose for restoration purposes, and then also delivering some additional climate science. And then to tie it all together, we're looking at really engaging the community, working with them to envision what they want the Choptank area to look like going into the future, and working with them to create a more integrated conservation design that they support and have bought into and actually become a part of. So I mentioned the oyster restoration. There's a lot of work currently underway. The Harris Creek right here, we are on our way to 377 acres restored. That's likely to happen this year, in 2015. We've also got work underway in the Little Choptank and planned restoration at about 200 acres or so in the Tread Avon River. So that work's going really well. Those are all sanctuaries, protected, and some of you might have seen Merritt last night. I don't know if you watched Somebody's Got to Do It, but he was talking about these places and how the hatchery is putting spat on shell and producing the larvae to put spat on shell into these locations. We also recognize that there are other habitat opportunities in this watershed, including fish passage. Some of you probably have seen the fish passage prioritization tool demonstrated or briefed at some points along the way. We plan to use that tool to identify some areas for dam removals. We also recognize that there's a lot of wetland opportunity here. We'd like to try to use a tool that we're developing with the Nature Conservancy to prioritize where those habitat or where those wetland restoration projects might be, ones that allow for migration in the face of sea level rise. And we're also working to quantify the ecosystem services. So for the oyster restoration that we're doing, we're trying to look at what is the nitrogen removal rates of these oyster reefs. Are they, if you restore oysters and get that habitat back, do you start to see changes in community structure in terms of more fish, more crabs coming in? And then we're also working on improving delivery of science. So there's several projects that fall under this. I'm just going to hit the high level here. We do have some climate resiliency projects underway. There's something called the Chesapeake Bay Sentinel Site Cooperative. You can look up the details. There's a plan that articulates what that is. That team is currently looking at trying to identify a couple sites in the Chesapeake Bay where they can integrate climate science, climate monitoring assets, and produce tools that they can deliver to those local communities. This area is one of the places that's being targeted for that work. We also have what we call the Water Column Habitat Project. That includes a lot of different things, and that's why I'm here today in particular, to talk to you and STAR and see how you can help us out with this. But that includes things like a flow path analysis that we funded with the Chesapeake Conservancy, looking at how water is flowing across the surface and how nutrients are changing in that flow as it moves into the main water bodies. And we've also got underway a biogeographic assessment. There are a lot of parts of Noaa that are contributing to this habitat focus area. This in particular is being done by the National Centers for Coastal Ocean Science and a couple of the people who are sitting at the Cooperative Oxford Lab. They're trying to pull together all the existing data sets, put it into a GIS framework so we can identify key stressors and use that to identify threatened habitats and create some decision support tools. This could be a pretty important scientific underpinning to the community engagement piece that we've got too. We're helping the community visualize this place and think about what we want it to look like in the future. Again, the community engagement is what we refer to as collective impact. We're currently reaching out. In fact, Paul Orlando is sitting in the back of the room. He's one of the key pin folks working on this with Peyton, but we're reaching out to key leaders in this community, talking to them about what they're interested in, what they want to see, and using that to guide this project moving forward. And I'm not going to mention everyone on this slide, but there are a lot of really important partnerships here. You know, this is a Noaa habitat blueprint, but we're not going to do all this alone. It's going to rely on a lot of different folks, Maryland DNR, Army Corps of Engineers on oysters in particular, but a whole suite of others. And in particular, the Chesapeake Bay program is a place we really want to try to connect up with. You probably noticed a lot of the things that I talked about there align pretty well with the outcomes in the new agreement. Talked about climate, talked about oyster restoration, talked about other habitat restoration activities. So there really is close alignment, and we think that this is a great place to really demonstrate results for those Chesapeake Bay new agreement outcomes. In particular, today I want to talk about how STAR, might become involved in this effort. So bridging to STAR, we've got the water column habitat monitoring that I sort of glossed over. We do have a particular project under this that we haven't started yet, but the idea is, can we start to take some of the land-based monitoring networks that are in place, the flow path analysis I mentioned and others, and try to seamlessly connect that with in-water water quality monitoring in a way that we can start to track nutrients from land into the water, and in particular in the water over oyster restoration, where we want to try to ensure that those projects persist. Again, $30 million in the water, potentially more than that, potentially could even double by the time all those tributaries are done. We certainly don't want to lose that investment, and one way to help us with that is to create this monitoring network of water quality to really track what's happening. So as part of this project, that's big. Trying to do that's pretty big. We've broken it down in kind of 3 areas. The first is let's look at the monitoring assets that exist in this watershed, from the headwaters to the tidal portion, open water in the Choptank. Get a sense of what's there, assess some of the gaps, put this into a GIS framework in a way that we can assess some of the gaps, link that up with the restoration sites, and see where we might look to put in place new sensors, new monitoring. So with that, GIS, we can look to create some sort of data management structure, working with folks on STAR, so that the information that's coming from these multiple monitoring assets become integrated into more of a streamlined, easily accessible set of data, and then from there start to look at places where we can put new sensors into place, in particular again over the restoration sites. So that's what we're looking for. So I'm happy. This is really the discussion part. What I put down is a higher level question is sort of how can we design a collaborative monitoring network to track water quality and other ecosystem health parameters as restoration efforts move forward. That's something we could think about maybe in other places, but in particular, back to the Choptank. This is discussion for today.